So I'd like to invite our three panelists and Josh Streit, who has been with us from the very beginning. He was locked in the windowless room with us, warm with a broken clock, and to give us a sort of an expert panel discussion. Again, this is not CME accredited, but I think it's nevertheless of great value and educational value to all of us. And so where do we go from here, guys? And we're going to have audience participation for this, and Tim will be ferrying the microphone around again.
Well, I'll start, I guess. Everybody just talked an awful lot about their various perspectives, and it's different points of view on the same object, right? It's relativity. I would think the relativity that you guys bring and the various institutions for whom you work bring is the missing ingredient, because we're vendors. We're going to come and we're going to ask you for things. And the biggest thing that we run into blocking that activity is just sites that don't do anything. They just, inertia wins, and do nothing is our biggest competitor. And one of the things that we're then really doing everything we can, ironically from a vendor agnostic perspective, is trying to help everyone understand that the first step is the most important one. It's figuring out how you guys can get started. Pick a use case, pick something that matters to you, rally the troops around that clinical problem you want to solve, and solve it, and learn from that, and just get things started for your institution. And if the vendors you're interacting with, or even if you're just making something on your own, you're going to learn through that. And if your vendors are supportive, you're going to grow with them. And if they're not supportive, you're going to find somebody else. And that's on us to be worth that relationship. And we want to bring that. That's the biggest thing I think that. Honestly, it's a problem all the way back up to even to Nvidia. You can have lots of activity on using GPUs for model training, but if those models aren't adopted, then you stop using the GPU. Right? It's really simple. Right? So we all need all of you, just like hopefully you need some of what we have to offer. So I just wanted to start a word just to not lose in the midst of all this information, and it's a lot of information, that the bottom line is start. Pick something in a place that you care about and start, and that ends up being the most important thing for your total experience.
One statistic that I thought was really interesting just on that, we had put out a paper with Nuance and Mass General Brigham about 2 years ago now, and where Mass General Brigham had said that of their data science team, something like more than 95% of all the models that they created never saw the light of day, right? They created and it didn't go anywhere. And almost in the same breath, the impact of the models that did see a light of day, saved thousands, tens of thousands of lives, right? So the impact that it can have is palpable, but also if you're able, you're creating things that don't go anywhere, that's also highly problematic, right? So, and at the end of the day, the things that we should be doing should be meaningful, right? So.
Completely agree.
Yep. What were the reasons they didn't go?
Great question. A lot of it had to do with, as I understand it, a lot of the teams were there to write, they're creating papers, publishing papers, but they were not intending to productize them. That they're created for, to, showcase state of the art or, what is possible. One of the things that we heard as part of that exercise was that the those who are creating models were not creating them in a way that IT could actually service and support them for the clinical enterprise. So you think about, and this is not, I'll say this is not for a particular site or for a particular company or for a particular enterprise, but generally, when researchers are creating a model using like a TensorFlow or a PyTorch or a Monai, they're done in a way that's, here's my data, which is usually in a directory of here's my positives and here's the directory of here's my negatives, and I've created now a set of model weights, which is a file that is a gigantic file of model weights, and I can say, here's my imaging study, here's my model weights file, here's my run engine, tell me the answer, and I get back on the command line an answer of a probability. That is not something that is connected into a PACS. That is not something that a radiologist can use. That's not something that a referring physician can use. I don't have, earlier today, one of the speakers talked about resiliency. That is not a fault-tolerant solution. That is not a highly available solution. All the things that become important for hospital operations, AI solutions at that level just simply are not, they're not ready. And so there are frameworks now. I think building platforms becomes so important, but also thinking about how do we package and share and make available these models from a foundational perspective, all the way from AI. This is what we talked about in the IHE paper: AI models to AI applications. And there is a big difference between those two things, and that becomes really important.
I think that's a really important part of the bridge guideline that Brad and I both mentioned, because it's not just on like how do you implement this into the technical workflow, it's how do you implement it into the clinical workflow. How do you make sure that you have the right intended user identified up front, so that you're thinking about the right implementation and usage method. It's all those different parts and pieces that, as a vendor, we hopefully should be putting into play. As an FDA cleared vendor, we literally have to. We have to put that into our 510K clearance. We have to structure our usability test, our pivotal studies, all those different parts and pieces to actually accomplish that. It's a little bit more Wild West in the language model type pieces. Jeff with RadAI has got a very clear use case and a very clear way to approach that can ultimately augment. But even there's complexities, like the way that, and apologies for speaking on behalf, but like the way that you developed your models to be user specific and user cognizant, like that little tweak right there. I don't know if you even thought about this like 7-8 years ago, but that's the transparency that's needed to actually make this usable and used by the end user.
Yeah, it's all about, as I was mentioning, that user experience, right? You're building specifically for the user, making sure that they're having the best possible experience, making sure it's as streamlined as possible, making sure it's zero change to their existing workflow, right? And for us, for our first product, for example, when we started doing exact language customization to the individual radiologist, that was key to be able to get it adopted, right? Because they're not going to accept anything that's not their language, right? And so making sure that it's exactly what they needed, what they wanted to see at the right point with a zero change to their existing workflow was really key for us.
Yeah.
In the small group, AI plus human symbiosis, Dr. Khan in his report out said the vendor role is so important so that you can ensure the product is being used as intended. And it reminded me of, we were looking at EHR usability challenges. I know they're different, but we reported to the vendor, and I'm not sure they believed us. So they sent their human factors usability team on site to do observations, and the response was, well, that's not the way that we thought you would use that. And I worry that this will happen with AI. Like, Brad, you had that nice graphic of here's what the process is, but it might not be that at all. We might be using AI in the second step. So what do you all see as your role? Like, will you be on site watching how it's used? Do you want reports from hospitals about the workflow?
So in the group with Dr. Khan discussing that specifically, the end user experience is ultimately controlled by the delivery mechanism. How the AI is consumed is going to be controlled by how it's delivered. So RadAI has an interface. AIDoc has an interface. Siemens has an interface, that a user interacts with. With a lot of these large language model type use cases that are EHR dependent, The EHR has the interface, and they control the interface. They control the ability to get feedback. They control all that kind of stuff, because a physician, theoretically at least, a physician that's in a demanding clinical environment that's already overtasked with what they have to do in their EHR cannot take one more thing. They can't take one more window. I think that was, I don't recall if it was Ken that had the example of, like, it was a second window that you had to click into, or it was the whiteboard. Emily maybe. Yeah, Emily had that, where it was a second window that all you had to do was click it, but nobody did, because they're already so overwhelmed. So, like, we've got to think about that as we're redesigning this entire structure. I'm not saying, break up the EHRs or anything like that, but at the same time, they control such a big piece of the pie and ultimately the delivery of this, that we have to have some more flexible methods and earn that space. Like, yes, we want zero change, but at the same time, sometimes things need to change. And the change needs to overcome, like, the cost of change needs to be overcome by the value of change. And that's what's incumbent on us as vendors to deliver, in my opinion.
I agree.
At the same time, like our most recent product, we've focused on providing really deep care, right? Where we are shadowing virtually and seeing how the workflow is working for them, taking their feedback immediately in these virtual calls or in person. We're also getting direct feedback requests, support requests, so on and so forth every single day, and responding to them same day, making sure that we address issues as quickly as possible. So really trying to provide that immediate feedback cycle.
Which you can't do via an EHR.
No.
There was a question over here.
I have a question just about implementation and providing acceptance testing scripts to make sure that it's working the way that it's intended to work. Are you providing them as vendors, and is that in your roadmap and plan, like a test case scenarios?
Yes. The term I think you're referring to is validation. Like because it's not just does the software and the UI and all those things behave the way they're supposed to, but it's then what's the model performance as well. And in the AI space, you have to be able to, check the box on both of those, or you have nothing, right?
Validation in the specific institution.
Yes, we do that.
There's also calibration. Like, so if you think about that chart that I had up that had all those different colors on it with the protocols. Sorry. If you think about that chart with all the different protocols on it, out of the gate, we would be missing 30 to 40% of studies to analyze for something like pulmonary embolism, intracranial hemorrhage, or fractures, et cetera, just because they're either unexpected presentations, or it's this arcane CPOE thing that somebody clicks that has something misspelled or something like that. So you have to upfront calibrate and then validate, and continue to do that throughout time with automated systems like those proxies that I was talking about, to make sure that it's performing appropriately. It's not necessarily a script to run through, like from an acquisition perspective, like compliance validation of a modality, but it's something that a vendor and a site can work together on to catch up front and then to continue to monitor as time goes along.
There is a great video out there, very meme-like, of user acceptance testing. And I've done a lot of user acceptance testing with hospitals in prior lives. But the video is amazing because it's showing, I don't know if you remember the children's toy of you've got different shapes and you put the square shape into the square hole. And the video is watching someone who does user acceptance testing, and they take the square shape and they put it in the square hole. Like, yes. And they take the triangle and they put it into the square hole because it fits. And they put the circle and it fits into the square hole. And the user acceptance testing person is like out of their mind because it's incredibly frustrating. But as part of any sort of, I'll say, regulatory-based testing, for anything that is FDA cleared, absolutely there is an element of user acceptance testing. And when I did that, I would go on site with my user interface engineer and someone who's responsible for testing, and we just go through scenarios. We usually have about a 10 to 20 page set of tests that we walk the user through. We don't interfere. We watch them interact with it without instructions, so that completely unbiased. and collect feedback both during the event as well as after, and then we take that back to help drive that. So important, but in a in an environment where this really literally means life or death, it is a must. I mean, from a regulatory, but also just from a good solution building experience.
Yeah,
So.
totally. And then, publish. We have a research team that we engage with our customers, and we help them, have a review their data, and they use that for publication so that, it's out there for public scrutiny. Did it work well? In what kind of environment? In all environments? A trauma environment, a community-based environment, a private reading practice environment? Like, which one? Is it the same every time? Probably not. And what are the variants? And, what was the downstream impact with each environment? The environment's different, so the downstream impact could be different, even though the model's the same. And now apply that to the theoretical number of models that you might want to deploy to the human anatomy, right? So one of the challenges that this need for validation then brings, paradoxically, is scale. Like, we can analyze all this stuff. Do you have time to look at it? Do you have the experts within your staff to adjudicate how much we can show you? That's a real question. So it will take two to tango on this particular subject. It's really, really important. I don't want to dismiss it at all. But I do think we might have to be creative together at how we do it as a vertical at better scale, because we're going too slow. I don't know if you've noticed. We do need to figure out ways to do this safely and collaboratively, but more quickly as well, because time's wasting. Like, I've only been here for a few days. I've had multiple conversations with physicians that are at their wits' end. I was texting with my sister, who's a trauma surgeon. She just quit. She quit. It's her whole identity. She quit. That's how bad it is for some people out there. And that's a very, not to get morbid on everybody, but that is a dire situation. This is something we must solve, okay? It's not that her hospital can do with one fewer surgeon. It's not like they got extra, trauma surgeons that take bullets out of people for a living, but now they need one, and that's sad. We have to figure out how to go faster in a safe way, in a trustable way, but it's got to be more quickly than we are today.
So, yeah, thanks for that explanation. I think I probably understood about 20% of it. Or let me actually correct myself. I knew about 0% of it. I now have awareness of 20%, but I think I understand more. And here's the point I'm trying to make. You're clearly just describing a systems perspective, right? And it's a systems perspective for the technical aspects of AI implementation. The other topics that have been discussed fall in the category, of systems of care, human factors. There's a third system that we've been talking about. Maybe it's a subsystem, I guess, if I'm using the right terminology, and that's the financial system of both care and technology. Put those together, take them apart, it's financing. So that's three main, subsystems. And the big challenge, it seems, is how to draw an appropriate circle around all of those and say, these really are one system. And my question is really about, your question, what could we do better? What could we all do better? What's a possible way forward to basically get to yes? Because that's the main question. I mean, people are not trusting that these really are solutions, and that this systematic way of thinking about AI implementation, they're not necessarily maybe trusting that that's a way to get past some of the barriers. So here's the main point or question. It seems a lot of the trust is based on the distinction between a potential ROI, which is what a lot of potential innovations that maybe end up being novelties claim. So the distinction between a potential ROI and the actual ROI. Is that maybe that's too sophisticated for some groups to digest, that you're trying to, convince to make a reasonable decision about an investment. But it seems like that awareness might help let them know that you really are thinking about the full system, and that you understand people, they've been burned before by a lot of potential ROIs that haven't panned out. And what you're doing is you're accounting for that distinction in what the innovation that you're bringing. I know that's a lot to put on the table. I hope it makes sense. But the real question is, have you tried that strategy, and how did that go? Was there trust when you basically said, we understand that experience, that a lot of the innovation and promise of ROI that you customer have been given hasn't panned out. We understand that, and we're accounting for and trying to plan and design, around that. Thanks for the patience with the long-winded question.
I mean, for our products, we tend to have kind of shown the ROI at so many different places across the country, and we have case studies and so on and so forth, that it generally does, like when there's a large AMC in the Southeast that found we reduced the error rate by 47% across all impressions, or the largest private practice in the country has shown we reduced the overall error rate across the report by 64%. That's been validated often enough that it's kind of hard to debate. Right. Other areas where this may increase your productivity are more squishy, right? Because every radiologist has a different shift, has different volumes. It can vary a lot, right? And so here we may increase your productivity by somewhere between 10 and 17% for our first product. And that will be validated more often than not, but not in every single practice, not in every single shift, right? And so you provide that caveat in terms of which ones you're absolutely sure of, which ones have been proven in many different places, whereas other parts of the value add may be more squishy, right? But yeah, generally, of course, when you also provide an RO or a pro forma for financial for the CFO, they're going to discount that automatically regardless, right? So if you say that you're going to have a 13x ROI, they're going to discount that to 5 or 6 or something. And so, but you provide a very large amount of buffer there, right? Because of what the ROI actually is.
So thinking back, even 5 years ago, length of stay was immediately discredited. Claiming that you can impact length of stay with artificial intelligence, well, I had a CFO literally say, if I accepted every claim on length of stay that I hear from vendors, I would discharge a patient 5 days before they enter the hospital. And I understand that perspective. I completely get it. There has been a significant bolus of information on some of those softer factors that are real cost savings for the system. Our systems are not getting more efficient. They're not getting more physicians. They're not getting more nursing staff. So we need to really augment them and free up beds and frankly, get the patient out of there. They don't want to be in the hospital any longer than they have to be in the hospital. They want to go home. Like, I want to go home when I have a family member or myself in the hospital, which happens an unfortunate amount of time. So helping that pathway, helping that is really starting to be embraced, but you have to track it. And like an example with us, I'll go to that pulmonary embolism example again, just because it's a good, well-vetted one. We got it cleared 6 years ago. You can augment the quality of the radiologist by 12 to 16% on average in most retrospective studies. That's not a intended use of the solution, but it's something that the sites that have used it looked at, and they found that they were spotting more pulmonary embolism earlier. Sometimes they were smaller. So you could identify that patient as a candidate for community-based AC therapy and get them out of the hospital. Like, don't worry about the shortness of breath, no observation, go home, get on warfarin or Coumadin or whatever it is that you need to be on at that point in time. I'm not a clinician, obviously. Get them out. But then for the patients that have a pulmonary embolism that's more acute, make sure that they're getting down the right pathway faster. So we had the detection algorithm at the radiologist level that was, or the triage algorithm that was of interest. But then other physicians like interventional radiologists and cardiologists and critical care physicians said, this would be useful to me. But I don't want to get every single one because I'm only going to look at like 10% of those. That's overwhelming. So then you have to use data, other AI algorithms to say, okay, is there a right heart strain? PE, and it's a big one, plus right heart strain equals maybe critical care should look at that. But again, that's a little overwhelming even there. So then you connect to the EMR itself, and you see that they have troponins and that they have lactic acid and all these different concerns. And based on that, you can actually get down to the patient that the critical care physician wants to see, and then ultimately enable, if there's going to be an intervention that can happen at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, instead of probably not 11 o'clock at night because everybody's already gone home, or it's not that urgent, they're in between, or 8 o'clock the next morning, and get that patient intervened on, treated, discharged, or in the step-down unit by the next day, instead of having to, keep them soaking overnight, do a procedure, keep them for an extra day or two. Now, what this results in is tangible impact that can be measured. There's been a number of studies presented at the Pulmonary Embolism Response Team Consortium by different sites. Cedars-Sinai showed, I think, a 30% reduction in ICU length of stay for that exact use case for patients that had an intervention. Doubled the number of patients that had an intervention. Appropriate patients that qualify for it, that were kind of falling between the cracks, or they were being caught too late for that intervention. UTMB demonstrated 35%. HCA Methodist in San Antonio showed 50%. Cedars-Sinai quantified the dollar value of that and what they saw in the reimbursements and the cost for that patient, and they found it saved $15,000 per patient in the ICU alone. Forget the overall length of stay, which was also shortened by about 2 days. And that was $500,000 in their one single center study that was able to track and value each step of that journey that started, again, from that initial radiologist workflow integration and then just ballooned out from there.
Plus, I heard Jensen Huang's going to compress computing down to 0 cost, so it's all free. In seriousness, that there is a lot of compression there. I'm going to take slightly the other side of what my colleague just said here, and we're involved in a lot of these same discussions, and every stat he just told you is public. Like, we can send you the papers, they're all true. I'm in the process of changing my mind. I'm confessing right now. I think we need to count return differently in this space. Every institution's accounting is their own accounting. What the impact will be, kind of to your point on the individual radiologist, it's going to be specific to your site. It's super private. They don't want to share a bunch of patient outcome data that's required in order for you to know what the downstream impact of that finding was. I tend to look at it more and more these days as, can I positively impact a patient? Yes or no? How many of those humans can I help per year, per month, per use case? And when you look at the portfolio of things that you can deploy today, reasonably, they're FDA cleared, widely published, yada, yada, plus all the stats he said, we can go to a decent-sized health institution and say, there's 2,000 people that we know that we're going to positively impact. Do you mean to tell me you don't want to do that? You have another means to do that at scale? Those are the choices that a strategy team on the other side of the table that I sit on, you have to make. And no, choosing nothing is that choice. So when you're talking about patient safety and quality and human factors and AI, I think this is a really critical thing for people to begin to consider that, we used to hold film, and now it's all run through modalities, which then grew into what is PACS. This is table stakes to function in clinical care today. AI is about to become table stakes because it's hitting its inflection and scale point. And if we have anything to do with it, it's going to hit a standardization point, which means it can be implemented even faster and faster and faster. It's going to become normal, right? It's already normal. It's in every one of your pockets. It's on every one of your phones. Why isn't it normal in your reading room? Don't you want to impact 2,000 people a year? You probably do, especially if you're one of those people or your family member is. And as we mentioned in our 2-day session beforehand, we're all patients eventually. So let's build the system you want in place on that day. You want to have highly productive radiologists. You want to have every computer powered with accelerating computing. You want FDA qualified solutions, making sure the radiologist doesn't miss something because they're looking at something else or they're tired, right? As it was covered earlier in one of the presentations. They're an excellent radiologist, but they just happen to be tired, and so they're 5% less. Isn't that your return? maintain productivity, maintain quality. Don't be 5% less because you're human. I think that's a return. I'm biased. I'm terribly biased. Okay, I'm not trying to hide it. I'm never going to. Terribly biased, but that looks like a return to me. So I think our thinking about what does return mean, I think it needs to also adjust. I understand the raw economics. That doesn't need to be explained, right? We sell things. We understand. But I do think there's a meeting in the middle on this to be had. Sure.
Thank you so much for the discussion. I want to come back to a very important point, in my opinion, about usability and users' acceptance, and how that's really going to be, hopefully not a trap for all the technology and the AI that comes, especially that has to integrate or work with the existing EMRs and EHRs that we have, especially the bulk of them. It's always intriguing to mention that these devices that we hold in our hands, the smartphones, as maybe young as 1 year old or 1.5 year old, my kids, they start, very easily, work with them. Maybe it gets a bit tricky and difficult if you have to go through the settings and the 1,000 settings that these iPhones or whatever other devices they put so you can manage it. So it's as simple as that. And you go to for example, to the ATM machines or when you used to use different payphones or whatever, you always see in these presentations how difficult and hard to follow 1,000 instructions. So you want something that's really intuitive, direct. Talking about EHR, a lot of experiences about, we thought that they did not know about it, and we did a big campaign of education about how to interact with a certain tool or with a certain alert. You just have to do a couple of clicks, select the right thing. But again, in the context of the workflow, problem, some would guess I'm talking about, for example, sepsis. We did a whole campaign to improve the, you call it acceptance. Actually, that's what the HR says. It's accepted the alert versus dismissed it. So we were going from down less than 1%, very bad, up to 10, 15, 20% where you're going. I guess that's a huge achievement going that high because, the acceptance rate for alerts, interruptive alerts is less than 10% at most. In that context or that example, and again, the whiteboard, the electronic whiteboard, we have the same exact thing here as well that I can tell a story about. But how do you see, with you as vendors, representing vendors with these new technologies, the AI that has to integrate or interact with an EHR or EMR, where do you see the ability to, enforce that seamless integration and for the users to accept it and use it instead of having to fall into the traps of clicking and so forth. One big vendor, I'm not going to name, but I think they realized that their current structure now is not really functional or for the foreseen function, for the foreseen future. So they decided, I think, to probably over a few years to get rid of the whole basic structure and now build a new AHR based on AI. So with those existing vendors, where do you see or how do you see you can enforce a seamless integration than having to go and do clicks? And I was told that physicians are very, very specific about counting the number of clicks they have to do before they do a function.
We as a company have a very specific philosophy of making zero changes to workflow. So our first product, for example, was a zero-click solution where there was absolutely nothing new to learn. People get used to it within 2-3 minutes, it operates exactly at the right time with 0 clicks and drops in exactly what they were going to say directly into the solution they're already using. Right, that's easier for some things than others. Right, so now our more recent solution, which is a full reporting platform. Now we're trying to maintain as much of the existing workflow as possible, right? So we support all the existing hotkeys, shortcuts, voice commands. All the existing templates are automatically imported. All of the existing workflows for nested pick lists, nested templates, macro-heavy workflow, so on and so forth, all work exactly the same way. And then we add optional new generative AI features to make it easier to do certain things, right? But we try to maintain every single thing that they're currently doing to make it as easy as possible to switch over, right? Now that's not always doable. So for example, with our continuity as our follow-up solution, there we have to integrate with Epic, with Cerner, with Athena Health, so on and so forth. And the amount of work it takes to be able to do my chart app messages, to be able to do in-basket messages to SO patients and providers is a lot, right? And you have to coordinate with the health system's Epic team to have those resources built in to be able to, for example, for my chart app messages, that's not a direct workflow that will work for Epic, right? So you have to be able to route it through actionable findings, for example, the module, to be able to generate a my chart app message, right? So there's specific workarounds, and it does require a lot of work if you're trying to integrate with EHR. It's really not that easy, but compared to like if you're integrating with other solutions in the workflow, you can sometimes just make it as seamless as possible.
So that, wherever you can, so totally agree with what he said, wherever you can, but also realize that these are new tools. They're different. The good news there is if you weren't different, you'd be the same. And if you were the same, you wouldn't be any better, right? So raise your hand if you don't want to be better. So you've reached perfection. Raise your hand. You have? Okay, we have one. Good, great. So
It's Linda, so she's correct.
right. We can validate. There are people here that can validate that. So it's carrot and a stick. Are there going to be no changes? Lord, no. I sure hope not. Like, there must be changes. Look at our system, right? We've talked about our friends from across the ocean as well. There must be changes. So we're going to have to be different. Plus, Judy Faulkner hasn't returned my calls. I would love if she'd pick up, and maybe we'd, move along a little faster. But in the meantime, we have to figure out how to take new insights and show it to people in a reasonable manner that they can learn very, very quickly with little instruction, and then do something better on those humans I was talking about. Like that's the goal. We're going to be imperfect at achieving that goal, but that's the goal each and every time. We're going to need partnership. We're not going to be able to, we're not clairvoyant. We can't invent everything ahead of time for everyone. We're going to need partnership out in the field to pull this off. We're going to need engineering expertise and how to avoid pitfalls that have been found in other, parts of medicine. And the last thing I'll say about it is you need to have, my advice, is to have the understanding that this is a new animal, okay? AI is not your EMR. It's not your VNA. It's not all your devices. This is a completely different kind of technology, like the internet was new, okay? And in order to do that, you need a net new clinical environment to run it properly. Your EMR was not built for this. Your PACS was not built for this. You're going to try to retrofit the internet onto the existing computer systems. How well did that run? Or do we have to replace all our computers?
I have an antique typewriter collection, and they won't send or receive email.
They can't connect, right? You can try real hard. I just want to use this.
Where there's a will, there's a way. I just published a blog, waxing poetic, about my BlackBerry curve. Loved that thing. Like
Raise your hand if you loved your BlackBerry.
Shows the age of the room. I was a late adopter of iPhones. 4S was my first iPhone, and I still miss that tactile keyboard feeling to this day. But the world's moved on. Like a trackpad, a tactile keyboard. I thought about buying the Bluetooth connected one. Horrible idea. Tested it. Not better in thought than execution. Made the phone like that long. You need to be adaptive, and you need environments that enable that adaptation. We're moving at a fast pace. These are changing. I think, Jeff, in your presentation, you covered that it shouldn't necessarily be a completely adaptive model changing in real time, because that has unintended consequences. But pace of innovation, pace of change, has been shortened from years down to months, down to weeks in many situations. So you need methods of engagement, methods of utilization that are able to flex and adapt to that in near real time. And to Josh's point, like the legacy systems were not designed with that in mind. They're trying. Some won't mention any specific vendors, but are completely scrapping their EHR environment and replacing it with an AI-powered version. That might win out in the long term. It's going to take some pain and some time to get there ultimately. I don't know that they have another choice. Epic's doing their best to fold in new capabilities. And they're moving pretty well on some of it. But again, it's that speed of change and what's the one specific site have when you're in your blackout period for your quarterly update. So Jeff also mentioned integration with like the EHRs and the back-end structures and MyChart and finding arcane ways into things like MyChart because they don't allow direct access. You also need to integrate ridiculously efficiently because IT teams are being drowned, absolutely drowned. Like clinicians are overloaded. IT teams don't even know what to do with these new endpoints. And they're hearing like, 50 new interfaces are needed for this one project. So if you can take those types of capabilities, those types of methods and put that in that single integration layer or as few as possible integration layers that you can have, you're going to have better success. Because then when you want to build a new clinical use case on it, you get your clinical change management, you get your intended use, you get your compliance reviews, you get all this, and then you plug it in and you do it.
And that's how you work toward a standard. That's how you can get toward a standard when you're using a standard set of integrations across shared services. And that's part of the strategy that we certainly try to implement and would advocate for anybody, no matter who you're working with, you should try to implement those. But it's also going to require a difference. I mean, Brad, what does Jensen say about the data center infrastructure? You have to replace it. Yeah, you literally have to replace it. Like, think about that for a second.
One thing that I'll add though, having been involved in the development of standards and profiling, it is so important to get your voices as clinicians. My role when I was at AGFA was that of a product manager, right? As a product manager, I listened to my customers, write up requirements, give that to the engineers, and they will make the product. At the same time, I was involved with standards and writing standards and understanding how do I need to talk to a modality and to an AI algorithm and to a reporting system, and we do this in standards kinds of ways. And I know, what that community needs. I was, my stakeholders is my customers, and it was incredibly frustrating that what I know that needed to be done in the interoperability space was not what my customers were asking for. And so I could never, as a product manager, justify why we need to build some of these, that connectivity layer to really build out what it would take to connect and integrate inside of an Epic or inside of a Cerner, because no one was asking for it. And so one thing that I always say is, yes, every, AI vendor or PACS vendor or, EMR vendor, you have salespeople, but you also have product managers. You also have user experience leaders. You also have, a plethora of people who are there to build, and they want to make you happy. They want to make you successful. They want to make you efficient. They want you to be able to save lives. And so it's so important that you work with them, share your requirements, your needs, but be thoughtful and inclusive of all the things that you need to actually drive success. And just as an example, something that we built as a community, if you think about a radiologist reading room, where you've got a 4-monitor solution. You have a work list, you've got 2 imaging monitors, and you have a reporting screen. And as a radiologist, you pick from the left, you read in the middle, you write on the right. And these 3 systems are made by 3 different vendors, and they have to talk to one another. And what you don't want to have happen, for example, is mixed context, where you've got a patient 1 over here, but you're looking at patient 2's images, and you see something like a lab result for the wrong patient for the images that you're reading, and you end up doing something really bad when you write the report. We used to have something called CCOW, which was done in the HL7 space, and it was a framework to communicate context between these different applications. but it required a separate installation. It was a separate service, like a fourth service amongst the three things that already exist. And as it turned out, nobody wanted to pay for it. No one actually took ownership for it. And I think only 2 companies in the world actually even implemented it, and they weren't even interoperable, which was a complete failure. Since then, when I was chair of HL7 Imaging Integration, II. We brought in different vendors. Epic was one. There was a fantastic thought leader named Isaac, and he brought this idea of what ended up being, it was called Firecast, which is a way that different applications can talk to one another, but didn't require a fourth service. That we could all participate in sharing not only the context that I've opened up patient 1, so everyone else make sure your context is also in patient 1, but also, hey, I've got an AI insight on application 1. Let's bring it forward into the other applications so they can also benefit from that insight. And when I listened to Isaac talk at Fire Dev Days last year, he said that they are doing hundreds of millions of transactions with Firecast. So a tremendous success. And it was brought about not only from vendors recognizing, hey, I've got a problem that I need to connect with my other vendor partners in service of, a workflow, but actually we worked very closely with physician leaders, thought leaders, to ensure that the capabilities that we introduced, which we just wanted to get shared context, but adding in the ability to share AI insights was of strategic value to that community and was brought in as part of the standard, and that's what is now available. So even, back to the question that I think started this, there are technologies there like Firecast to be able to interoperate and connect so that you don't have to extra clicks here and go to the sub-screens over there, but to actually drive that. But it's really, it just might be conversation you need to have with your vendor, maybe not the salesperson, but maybe one click deeper. So,
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Side note, I would note that every physician, every provider is different, right? So
Just ask them.
I'm a radiologist. I practiced for 10 years just doing overnight ER radiology shifts, read over 250,000 studies, and then ran a company where we have 7 years. We've worked with over 15,000 radiologist reports from all across the country for the last 7 years. And still every single day I come across new workflows. I come across new ways of dictating that I've never seen before. I come across new language that I've never seen before in reports. Every day there's something new to learn, and everybody has different workflows. And you just have to be able to adapt to all of this. You have to be able to get feedback from your clinicians and your providers on what they do differently, right? And how do you adapt to that?
100%. So I saw Linda had her hand up. Is that we're out of time, or you have a question? Okay.
I think there's back there and over there and.
Hi, I have a question along the line of Jeff. Since this is a human factor and patient safety conference, indulge us if you may. What's the failure mode in your implementation of AI solution with stakeholders, maybe like payer, maybe like provider, and what your RCA process like? I think our audience would love to hear that.
So failure modes, and then what is an RCA?
Root cause analysis.
Root cause analysis. Oh, I see. Failure modes. I would say building building champions across a health system can be complicated, right? Especially the more different departments that are intersects. And whether that's during the customer sales process or during implementation, certain of our products have the most issue there, just because you have to get enough IT resources, you have to get each of these different departments to be bought in, get primary care to sign on, this is for patient follow-up. So there's so many different key stakeholders that you have to involve in the process, and you have to line it all up in a way that keeps everybody happy, right? So I would say that's probably the biggest failure point. Once it's implemented, it kind of just runs, right? So, and our other solutions, once it's implemented by radiologists, they love using it, and so it's a lot easier, right? But in that implementation process, the harder the implementation process is, the harder the switchover is, the more barriers we hit. Yeah.
I would say make no assumptions. Our biggest benefit to our company came from our biggest mistake, and our mistake was based on assumptions. Assumptions that the algorithm itself was going to be the thing, and as Demetri kind of pointed out during the slide, and I'm kind of going back to what he presented on because it's such a big deal, it was only honesty that, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh gosh, I need to lose 10 pounds. Like, what am I going to do about it? Like, we had to have one of those kind of meetings, only it was with our board, and we needed a very large, undisclosed amount of money to fix the problem that we had found, which is we assumed that you were just going to plug the algorithm into your existing workflow, and that was going to be enough. And that was catastrophically, go out of business wrong. And that was an existential problem that we had to fix because we made one giant assumption that would have been a fatal flaw if we didn't technically figure out a reason. Thankfully we did, and kind of the rest is history. That's why we've been able to achieve scale, because we have this solution to a universal global technical problem, which is the heterogeneity of your data also has a rate of change. And if you don't solve for it, you will not map your AI to the total number of solutions that it needs to be applied to safely, AKA you will not be able to trust it. So don't make assumptions. Assume nothing. You almost have to figure out a way to take your bias and blank your slate, if I can coin that phrase right now, and clear your mind and clear out your assumptions and make sure you're not blinding yourself as you go into some novel project where you think it's just going to be straightforward and this simple thing, and you figure out that, oh no, it requires the invention of this whole other technology, to solve. That would be the biggest thing I would say.
Yeah, I would also add, we're FDA cleared, so we're required to have a feedback mechanism. As a more recent FDA clearance, that wasn't always there for 10, 15 years ago. Clear feedback mechanisms. So something as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down inside an application that you can control is able to provide some of that feedback and failure mode analysis, if you will, to see what's happening. But that's not enough. We expected when we implemented some of that capability very early on with the application that we would just get a bunch of thumbs downs, this is crap, it didn't run here. Instead, they literally asked us to create a wow button instead, where they could press down wow, because it saved them typing those 3 letters, which
Extra clicks.
Extra clicks, exactly. It was pretty awesome to realize that. But even there, again, I'd say the bolus of feedback we get is generally positive, much more so than we expected on the vast majority of the applications. So we can't rely on that feedback for all of the negative feedback, because the worst thing that can happen is, for example, I switched back to an iPhone recently, much to Josh's chagrin, and I never even, no, it was out of frustration. I couldn't make phone calls and stuff like that. It didn't work for that basic functionality, so I stopped.
Operator error.
Well, we're not going to get into that conversation. But I didn't contact Google and tell them that I was leaving the Pixel phone. I didn't even bother to complain. I didn't have it taken off my phone because it was portioned out over 30 months, so I kept it active on my AT&T account, all that kind of stuff. But the frustration level was such that I just stopped using it silently. And that is the death of an application. That right there will kill a company, it will kill an application in production. So that's where you have to start actually developing ways to not rely just on the user feedback, but identify how many cases that had a triage had no interaction with the AI results. They didn't see the value. Now, that could be because it was such a massive intracranial hemorrhage and the patient was so symptomatic that it just didn't make sense to look at it. Fine. That is an appropriate disengagement opportunity because you literally don't need it in that situation. The patient was already naturally triaged. But what about that time where it was there, it was not dictated, it was not in the report, and then that patient is now undergoing procedures and they actually have a brain bleed? Literally, these scenarios have been shared with us by our customers where something was going on with somebody's workstation or they had not yet provisioned that user, because they were just trying to do technical tests of the system. And there's situations where it's triaged. They don't know it's triaged during that technical rollout, if you will. And then there's a misfinding, effectively. So you have to think about ways to engage with that, uncover those opportunities as proactively as possible, address them either through like a message in near real time saying, hey, notice this, and that was the pathways that are developed, or monitor that back end information that, hey, we're missing this whole bolus of cases that we should be analyzing here. And there's something wrong, or your prevalence rate is 50% of what it should be inside your environment. And this is happening at sites where they go and they buy a hospital, and they don't tell us. Now, we should read the news and figure that stuff out ourselves. But they buy a system, they integrate them in, and all of a sudden their acquisition protocols change across the board, and our system should break if it was like rigid. But because it's adaptive, it's able to recognize that, and usually we'll call them and be like, something happened. Something changed here. Oh, you bought a whole nother, hospital. And that's, you have to build all these processes in, and that's where we have an ML ops team. It can't just be technical. Like, it can't be this, dashboard, these alarms and that kind of stuff. You have to have humans watching that. And now we could just like lob that over the fence and say, hey, good luck, here you go. We're gonna give you the tools, you can watch that. Or realistically, to make this stuff work, you deliver those capabilities and say, hey, we're seeing this. And we've already modified it, but just so you know, this blip happened in those situations.
I would also note, when we first started, our first product was not really critical to workflow, where even if it stopped working, radiologists could still do their daily work. When we started building products that were absolutely critical to workflow, where radiologists are spending like 75, 80% of the time on the platform, then it absolutely has to work, right? And then you have to start providing hypercare. You have to be really, really careful on what exact workflows they're using, what is not working for them, getting their feedback as quickly as possible, diving in and seeing what their current workflows are. And so building out those processes and that kind of system for our company has also been to make sure that we provide that positive customer experience when you have these really critical workflows that you have to handle.
Linda did have a question, but she doesn't have the mic. Oh, okay. No, we'll go this way.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll get to the question maybe in about 90 seconds. So if you think of nudge and behavioral finance, right? Mm-hmm. Now think of the perspective from a patient, not necessarily clinicians. And think of how health promotion, specific protection, early diagnosis and treatment, disability limitation, rehabilitation is a continuum, right? Historically, whether it was polio or other infectious diseases, that has gone. And as the population is changing and as systems get developed, you're getting more degenerative diseases, right? And the money is in caring for sick people. Mm-hmm. Although we call it health care, there's not really a lot of money to be made if the population remains healthy, right? Honestly, if you are a patient, you may regulate your own behavior.
Unless you're a Kaiser or Dr.
Yes.
Gross.
Yeah. But the point is, each person deteriorates from a state of health to a state of illness in some sort of slope, and that slope varies for each person. So if you're a clinician, the point comes, where along that slope would you intervene so that the risks of the treatment are lower than the benefits of the treatment, right? And often we get into this trouble. Take the simple example of aortic valve replacement with someone with a dilating LV, and you have imaging modalities, and you have passive surveillance. Come every 6 months for a repeat echo, right? Or for a CT or MRI for a lung mass. Are there methods, something to think about when you say think differently for the next 2, 3, or 10 years, of active surveillance based on patients' other behaviors? If Google or Amazon can collect data, for example, from your credit card purchases, from your library purchases, right? And if someone is a diabetic gaining weight and you have their food purchasing data, right? You have security systems and you have monitoring. You pay security companies to monitor your house so that you don't get robbed, right? Would future healthcare systems actually put out a subscription service, for example, where they can aggregate patient behavior data along with their phenotype or genotype and behavior in a way to integrate it so that they can nudge them to modify their behavior to prevent deterioration of existing illnesses.
So I'm gonna, as a patient, okay, so now like thinking on the, participation in the PFAC committees and that kind of stuff. I mean, I would never sign up for that, transparently. Like that would be a degree of access I'm not comfortable with. I don't know if everybody's gonna feel that way or not, and the question is, do we even need that? Like, yes, theoretically, there could be trends there that could be extracted out. I can tell you, with some of the changes made, the way that like the internet supplier can monitor connections and stuff like that, I exclusively use VPNs. So I'm, I suppose, a bit more privacy-minded. But I don't think we need to go that extreme necessarily, because if you think about simple use cases like coronary artery calcification, it shows up at ridiculously high prevalence inside studies for any reason. I imagine from an emergency perspective, overnight in particular, car accidents show up. And if you can catch a 38-year-old African-American male in that situation and get them on statins at 38 years of age instead of 55 years of age, that is worth a massive amount of prevention. Now, the challenge there is the sheer scale of that information. With that example, 40–50% of studies have calcium in them of the chest. So, like, how do you make that not overwhelming to the system and crippling to the system in the pursuit of primary prevention in that situation? That's where you can look at upper decile patients, that 38-year-old male, or that 60-year-old female that's not currently on a statin that has a significant calcium load abnormal for age, and also then start to look inside the EHR and see, hey, have they already had a stent or a cabbage, all this scenario. Now taking off the patient hat and putting on more of the application hat to get the right patients identified. And like what we found working, we have an innovation project with the American College of Cardiology around that. About 90% of patients can be stratified out of the higher risk categories because they're already on those preventative therapies or active management, and you can get in with that 10%. And that right there is going to make a difference in that patient's life and the societal outcomes of patients with that type of finding. And it also has the positive benefit, since you're getting the more acute patients earlier, of generating a revenue stream for the institutions that are actively managing those patients. So it's like benefits on both ends without being too minority report data analysis. That's my opinion, though.
I would say, regardless of personally, I'm kind of with you, but there are absolutely solutions that I've seen today that does these things. So I'd say I don't think that it's a future state that we're going to see applications that do this. You could sign up for it right now, for better or for worse. I do a lot. I mean, I'm always on my own health journey, and I love quantitative measurements. I have on my right hand, I've got an Apple Watch on my left, and I have all these statistics. I mean, I have too many statistics, but I love it. I don't think that's for everybody, but I think that's going to be a choice that we all get to make. I think what will be questionable or problematic or opportunistic maybe in the future is who is the user of that data, and who is the steward of that data, and how does that data affect the patient, right? I mean, I think that it's for me, doing this myself is cute, but if it ended up affecting my insurance rates, that would be a real problem. Or maybe not even my insurance rate, but whether I could get insurance, that would be cataclysmic for me as a potential patient. I think that's a whole brave new world kind of conversation to have, but technologically, it's possible, and I've seen applications that do this.
Well, there's the classic stories of people that are pregnant and don't even realize they're pregnant necessarily, yet they're getting ads for pregnancy stuff, or before they've told anybody, Google knows, and things like that. So it is a fine balance, and I would say it needs to be kind of like positive disclosures of ambient artificial intelligence usage during an encounter, stuff like that. It should be opted in, like not opted out.
Agree, but Microsoft had their health vault and it failed, and Google had Google Health and it failed, and Google invested in Verily. What have they made? The Apple Watch. Tim Cook went on TV and said healthcare is going to be our legacy. Is that how you're using your Apple Watch? Not yet. So, these are the most sophisticated technological firms in the history of man, and they're not doing it. And the question I have is, why? There's got to be something there, and perhaps it's some of the things that these gentlemen have shared. You could do those sorts of things. Hopefully, we are getting to a point, however, where we, simply are taking more ownership of our healthcare. You also have to look at who consumes the healthcare, and it's older people and those on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. So are those recipients of that kind of service? Probably not. It's actually everybody in between who has means and can acquire and pay for, et cetera. And the most likely entity to pay for something like that is the insurance company who has all the money. Do you want to sign up for that? You're going to give United that access into your life? Probably not. So there's a definite balance that has to be struck there. We're at no shortage of technological options, and the question is, what can you execute on that you can get someone to say yes to that will then have an impact, a good one? Yeah. And it's like, what's that combination of stuff? Let's do that. Okay, let's start there. Like I said at the beginning, the number one most important thing is your first step. Like, to start the journey. You've decided you're going to do it, now start. And figure out where you can. And that's the most important thing.
So it looks like we need to wrap, yeah. Well, if while the mic's turned on, if I could have one quick plug this is for the ACR PFCC projects. They have one called Scanxiety. It's the most recent one that's been worked on. Amanda was the former co-chair. She was the first patient co-chair of the PFCC, and she had low-grade serous ovarian cancer, passed away a couple years ago. But part of that was developing a way of helping patients manage their anxiety as they're having a scan for an oncological follow-up. And I think about these like larger pieces and like what anxiety would that create in a patient if they can't get access to a physician after the global monitoring has told them you're going to die in like 20 years or something like that. So the more that we have patient-engaged frameworks to help manage this and develop it and culture it and make it part of our culture as citizens of the United States and the world, I think the better off we'll be. And hopefully we'll get there in the coming years.
Thank you, Demetri. That's the best possible ending on patient-centeredness. That's what it's all about. And I want to express incredible gratitude, first of all, to all of you, the 30% who hung into the bitter end. I want to thank our expert panel of industry leaders. I want to say that although we've reached the end of our conference, we've only really started at the beginning of this new field, which combines the mature discipline of human factors with the emerging technology of AI for the goal of helping patients and keeping them safer. And Josh triggered me, remember the 1970 book by Alvin Toffler called Future Shock. And what he predicted, he was a futurist in 1970. I was 10. But he said a lot of things, that turned out not to be correct. But one of the things he said that was correct is that the rate of change is accelerating. And the future will come faster than we expect. And the last thing I want to say is that everything that's worth doing requires extraordinary effort. Mm-hmm. Thank you. The shuttles are waiting. Maybe we'll see you again in a couple of years. We'll see what happens. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bruno, thank you. Yeah, really appreciate it. Yes.
That was fun.
Already have it.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
There's some, I didn't want to say it, but there's a company called
Yeah, good.
which is very, it's like
You haven't stopped